Hi, welcome back. This is episode 2 of how to run the Levee adventure path in Frog God Games, the Blight. In this video, what I'm going to talk about are the villains of the Levee. First, let me sort of talk about the way they wrote about it in the book. The villain of the story, as written, would probably be the angel, the beautiful. Is she an angel? Is she a between twisted creature posing as an angel? I don't know. They don't really sort of explain it. So one of the things, I guess, about the setting that is very interesting, I think it's, billed as sort of a horror kind of setting. So they do leave a lot to the imagination. They don't exactly explain everything, I think, in an effort to sort of bring up more of that horror. And so the thing that they do in the adventure path is, as you're going along, you start hearing more and more about an angel. And her plan to essentially cleanse the city, to wipe away the evil. And, along the way, you meet people who follow her and worship her, and they're, for the most part, just terrible, evil creatures, entities. When you encounter the between is very dark and twisted. And so as, you start to build up through the adventure path, there's, you kind of start to see the beautiful as kind of, not a good thing. Like she's not a good entity. There's, maybe hints that she could be, but there's little evidence to suggest that she actually is. The reason why this is important, because, over the course of the adventure, they talk about, her reaching out to some characters and trying to communicate with them. And eventually in the final chapter of the adventure, she's eventually going to ask those players or those characters that she's been communicating with to come over to her side. And so they're presented with a choice. But I'll be honest, the way this is written, there's no real choice. I mean, assuming your players are playing heroic kinds of characters, they're going to see her as evil. It's kind of, the more predictable way an adventure like this goes. And so they're going to choose not to side with her, and they're going to kill her. The way this is written, I think that's the only way this could go, unless your players throw a major curveball at you. Because she really does seem like an evil creature in terms of how it comes across in the adventure. But what if that doesn't have to be the case? What if she wasn't some weird between twisted creature? What if she actually was an angel? What if instead of evil, she was actually good? Chaotic good, to be exact. Sometimes I think you can have really interesting villain possibilities, and a character that is, for the most part, good and believes what they're doing is right, but maybe goes about it in not the best way. So they're doing some genuinely good stuff, but then they're also doing some messed up stuff in the spirit of being good. Now your players potentially are going to have a much more difficult time choosing. So this is what I'm doing with my players, and with my game. She's chaotic good. And her plan is to eliminate all the evil people within the city, by pulling the city into the between. And then her, between creatures are going to hunt them down, when it's all said and done. Now, the players don't necessarily know the full extent of how she's going to go about things, but, they know she wants to improve the city. They know she wants to cleanse the city of evil, even if they don't know exactly how she wants to do that. And she's done some good stuff along the way. I had a player who, in his backstory, basically his PC's mother sold her soul in order to get him powers, to be able to protect himself. And, in the beginning of the campaign, his mom dies. And this is where the evil creature who she sold her soul to would have collected. But the beautiful intervened and saved her soul. And he actually learns about this, later on in the campaign. And she's done other things to help people, save people. But just like is written in the book, there are some really twisted and evil people, part of the panacea, who are also worshiping her and saying like she's this good thing. Sort of leading the players to wonder what the hell is going on here. Why are these, if these evil creatures are worshiping her, maybe she's not all that good. And then eventually they come to find out that, she has been reaching out to these people, basically in an effort to give them a chance to redeem themselves. She's trying to show them the light, trying to give them opportunities, to do better, to be better. And of course they're failing. And so the PCs learn that, okay, she doesn't just want to wipe out evil, but she wants to give people a chance to change, to repent. Once again, trying to drive home that fact that, maybe, this beautiful that they keep on hearing about isn't so bad. I wanted to set up a real choice when they get to the end. When they're confronted with, do they side with the beautiful, or do they oppose her? I wanted it to be a real choice, something that they really might want to sort of, think about and go back and forth. And ideally, I want to give them the opportunity to actually choose the side with her. And because, that final adventure is what I'm considering the end of Act 1. The Act 2 is what happens after. And so we'll see what happens with that with my own players. But, if they do choose to side with her, she's going to complete her ritual. She's going to pull the city of Casterhage into the between, and they're going to see carnage and anarchy unleashed on the city. Her creatures are going to start hunting. And how are my players going to feel about that? Because I don't think they fully comprehend the lengths she's willing to go to achieve her goals. It's ultimately a good goal, but her methods are extreme. Really trying to fit into that idea of chaotic good. So it should be interesting to see how that all goes. Now, in an effort to sort of make the choice viable, there's several things I'm doing. One, I'm trying to let them know her motivations, that she really does want to do something good. I wanted them to see her actually do good things, the kind of things a good NPC does. I wanted to also build up the city as ugly, with lots of evil, lots of bad people. The aristocracy, the upper class is horrific in this city. And they are NPCs that the players might not care to see, eliminated. I wanted to create direct connections with some of the PCs through elements of their backstories, things that she's done to help them, and not in a weird bribery kind of way, but just it seemed like the right thing to do. So I really wanted to build her up as actually good, despite the fact there's going to be aspects of the adventure that are going to make them cast that into question. The other thing I'm starting to do now is, when they start to encounter some of the between monsters, that are being controlled by her, they're going to ignore the PCs. They're not going to attack. They're not going to, try and kill them. And they're going to say like, oh, so she can control these, and they're not going after good people. They're only going after the bad ones. Once again, extreme, but good people are safe. Now, I'm thinking, in Act 2, there might be more collateral damage, making them start to question whether or not this was a good choice. So, I want to maybe play with that a little bit. One of the things going on in the background of the adventure path is a brewing revolution in the city. I'm going to have her become a symbol for the revolutionaries. And so she's going to be tied into all these things in the city that are kind of good. And so when we get to the end of the AP and they have to make this choice, do we support her and protect her and help her finish this ritual? Or do we oppose her and essentially try to maintain the status quo of the city? And she's going to have there's going to be various NPCs. There's going to be some evil ones saying, hey, you guys should probably destroy her. There's going to be some good ones also telling them, like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't like it. She's probably some kind of honeypot. You need to destroy her. So, there's going to be a lot of NPCs, both good and bad, saying, I don't trust her. Just get rid of her. And so hopefully, one of the things I'm going to be able to sort of create with my players is, there's not going to be a clear-cut right and wrong choice. You were going to kind of be in that gray area where they're going to have to make a gut check, see what makes sense to them, and sort of see how it turns out, regardless of which choice they make. One of the ideas I already have is that, if they side with the beautiful, the revolution's going to proceed in Act 2 with her at its forefront. And she's going to lend the revolution a little bit more juice to actually succeed. If they side against the beautiful, the revolution's going to have a much harder time. And they may actually, in fact, fail. Because they're just going to lack the counterbalance to what's supporting the aristocracy. And that's one of the other villains, not of the Levee, but of the city, which is the Devil Demorial. She runs the city. She's the sort of the unspoken power behind the city. And she's very invested in keeping the status quo as is. And so, in an Act 2 where the beautiful is still alive, you have an angel on the side of the revolution and a devil on the side of the aristocracy and the status quo. And so you have a really interesting, I think, sort of interesting possibilities there. I think one of the things I think you're starting to see is, I think them supporting the beautiful can lead to the more interesting ending. I'm not going to say the better ending, but I think what might be the more interesting ending. If they side with the city, in essence, in the status quo, I think it's going to be a little bit more of a conventional Act 2. Whereas I think, the consequences of siding with her, seeing how they deal with that will be interesting. It might be sort of the situation where they support her through the revolution, and, should they, overturn the aristocracy, they may be like, okay, now we've done that. Now I think, we might need to do something about the beautiful. Hasn't been really, I don't approve of her methods, even if the end result was something we wanted. And so they might have sort of another tough choice there at the end. They might have supported her in sort of the end of Act 1, but at the end of Act 2, they might decide enough is enough. So I think that has a potential to be a lot more interesting. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to them. I'm going to sort of leave it gray. They're starting to think that the beautiful is the villain, but maybe she's not the villain. And I'm going to see what they do with it. So she's theoretically the main villain, although I'm going to put a question mark on that. Because since I am sort of building her up as this chaotic good character, is she the villain? Is she not the villain? There's sort of a gray area there, which is what I think makes her really interesting as an NPC here and potential villain. Now, who are some real villains in here? Number one is the Knights Ocularis. These are the villains that the PCs will encounter first, specifically when their hometown gets destroyed. The Knights Ocularis roll into Wiccan and they wipe it out. And so that's going to be a very dramatic start. And I'm going to talk about how I made that even more dramatic in one of the later videos. But they are introduced as a villain right from the get-go. And at the head of the Knights is Paladin Thornrage. He's sort of one of the sort of in the background kind of villains that the PCs will probably have minimal contact with up until the very end. They're more likely to encounter his second and third in commands along the way rather than actually encountering him. Though you could play that a lot differently if you want to. Now, this is where I felt one of the NPCs in the book was wasted, actually. And that's Paladin Rachel Birch. She doesn't show up until somewhere maybe in the first third to the midway through the adventure path. And she's really not really utilized very much, or at least not effectively. But I think she can actually be a very interesting villain and NPC in this. So what I did right from the get-go is, why not have her be the paladin who leads the raid on Wiccan? So she's one of the first people they see destroying their town, killing people they care about. And so right from the get-go, she is established as this person they're going to want to go after. But she's also this really powerful, NPC at the time, who they can't even imagine going up against. At least not yet. And so when they start hearing that the Knights Ocularis are hunting them, they're going to hear that Paladin Birch is hunting them. You can also at this point start introducing Lord Oxwald, who is another one of Thornrage's higher level lieutenants. The way I've sort of thought about it is Birch and Oxwald is his left and right hand. They're his two main people in the, who act on his behalf in the city. And so eventually Lord Oxwald starts to pop up, coming after them. But one of the interesting things that happens, that's actually as written in the book, is that eventually the Beautiful starts communicating with Rachel Birch. And eventually Birch becomes a supporter of the Beautiful. She gets won over. And this is where I think things can get potentially interesting. Just for an example, eventually the Knights are going to find out where the players live and do perform a raid on their home base. And I had that raid led by Lord Oxwald. And so, the players, did a sort of an elaborate escape. And then as they're escaping and sort of going through the city district that they were in, clomping down the street on her horse is Rachel Birch. Now, they were, kind of in disguise at the time. And so as she goes by them, she sort of recognizes, not through sight, but just through feel, someone else connected to the Beautiful. Because at this point, one of the players has very much gotten connected with her. And she sort of looks at him without necessarily seeing him, but then says something to him that signifies that she recognizes him and that she's also supports the Beautiful. Something along the line, I forget what I said, something along the lines of, may the angel guide you. And then she just keeps on going and lets them pass and doesn't do anything to stop them. This blew their mind. This person who has been sort of the villain in their minds, just let them go. And, and I think that's going to build up for some things later on that I think can be pretty interesting. One of the other ways in which they wasted Birch in sort of the way this is written is that when they finally do get to potentially confront her, she's basically gotten killed by the Beautiful and turned into a sort of a twisted between creature. What the hell? This is potentially a great villain that I think really was wasted in that way. And so what actually I did is I actually had her escape with the Beautiful. She, because they have the Beautiful eventually get captured by Thornrage, and then Birch, lets her go. But in the process of letting her go, she gets killed. Makes no sense. I mean, if you're playing the Beautiful as sort of a twisted between creature, evil creature, okay, sure. Yeah, I guess that tracks. But, I think it's a lot more compelling if Birch actually gets saved by the beautiful and leaves with her as a potential maybe ally in the future. Hard to imagine them possibly fighting alongside the person who destroyed their life. But maybe it'll happen. Who knows? I have to see how my PCs will respond to that potential scenario. But that's a lot more compelling, a lot more interesting. But that, so what in the book, they have it, they call her the thing that used to be Rachel Birch. That actually is a good idea. And so to some extent, and the way I'm actually going to do it is when they finally confront, Lord Thornrage at the end, I'm going to have it to be a 2-stage boss battle. In the first stage, it's just normal Thornrage with, Oxwald and maybe some other backup. And the PCs are probably just going to wipe the floor with them, which is going to feel sort of anticlimactic. But then then Oxwald and Thornrage are going to merge, and it's going to become the thing that used to be Thornrage. So I like the idea, but I think it makes more sense of it being Thornrage, who she really wanted revenge against for capturing her, rather than it being Rachel Birch, who actually rescued her. It feels more internally consistent to me. And so that's the way I'm going to play it. And so those are some villains. Some other minor villains that may or may not, you've got the Panacea, who are sort of the more twisted sort of players in the city who support the beautiful. And like I said, my sort of thought process there is these are people who the beautiful contacted, giving them a chance to repent, and they just never did, with one exception. One of the things in the book is that there's these 3 sisters. And one of them, Abigail, is rewarded with paradise. And the way I did it with my players is she was rewarded for paradise because instead of creating twisted things, she actually created things that were beautiful, things that were elegant, things that weren't twisted. She changed. And because she changed, she was rewarded. And then her sisters didn't get paradise because they continued to make grotesque kinds of things. So the Panacea is going to be a villain. One of the things the book built up as a potential villain for the players was the family, which is, the clan of were-rats that live in the festival district. My players actually managed not to turn them into enemies. They were slick in how they dealt with the family, and so the Grass never came to realize that it was the players who messed up their operation and festival. So they were never actually a villain for my players. They were somebody the players sort of tiptoed around and were careful with, but they were never sort of a villain for my players. So they may or may not be a villain for you and your players. But one potential villain that isn't talked about in the actual adventure path, but is mentioned in the sort of the gazetteer of the city, that I think has the potential to be really interesting here, is the Great Coven. This, I think, can be the villain of the path to some degree, and can also be the thing to help sort of, if you want to move your players more towards seeing the beautiful as something potentially good rather than evil, introducing the Coven might be a way of doing that. When they got to the I think it's Adventure 7, where they go to Ossuary to finally confront the beautiful, one of the things they learn before they go there is that the Knights Ocularis have some means of capturing the beautiful. And the NPC, Lord Benedict Morrill, who's the one who clues them into this, they eventually ask, where did they get this weapon? How are they actually going to do this? And, I had the NPC, I'm not 100% sure, but my contacts think it might be this group called the Great Coven. And my players hearing that name, they're like, bells are going off, and you're like, oh God, this is a villain. This is actually the big bad. And so it was a way of sort of starting to seed that in. And just to give you a little background on the Coven, if you haven't read it in the book, is, this is a collective of magic users. Specifically magic users that seem to be in cahoots with the devil Lucifer. And when we talk more about religion, I'm going to talk a little bit more about his role in the city and what I think is actually a fairly substantial role. But he seems to be the backer of the coven, along with Demorial. And so I think they have the potential to be a really, really interesting villain here, and potentially one of the big villains for Act 2. So as far as villains go, this is sort of what's presented in here. There's other minor villains for different adventures that I don't think we need to go into. The ones I've talked about are the ones that are going to be present through large chunks, if not the entirety of the AP. The one that's sort of billed as the villain for this is the Beautiful. Whether she's going to be the villain or not in your sort of running of this, I guess is up to you. You can run it conventionally, in which case she'll be a more predictable conventional villain, or you can make things a lot more gray by, instead of having her be evil, turn her into chaotic good and actually have her be an angel. I even gave her an angel name. You know, I had the moniker of the Beautiful be something that others gave to her, not her actual name. I went with the name Shaftiel, which was apparently celestial for judge of God. And I'm going to talk about why that can be interesting when we talk about religion. But I had her be a real angel with a real angel name. And so just to make that aspect of her more real for the players. And so as you know, they first learn of her as the Beautiful, but then eventually learn about who she actually is, some of her background, just to make her identity as an angel more solid. The Knights Ocularis, they are going to be the villain early on. And, you know, probably right up until the very end, to be honest. Big question mark is whether or not Rachel Birch, especially if you choose to introduce her early, will be a villain for the whole path. If they choose to side with the Beautiful at the end, Birch is going to be their backup. It'll be interesting to see how they react to that. So there's some potential there. And then the big question is whether or not you want to work in the Coven. They are not named in the adventure path at all. So it'll be up to you whether or not you want to do that. I guess it comes down to whether or not you plan on doing an Act 2. The adventure path only takes you up until the final adventure where the PCs decide to either side with or against the Beautiful. You know, they have some ideas and suggestions for what you could do next, but that's not actually in the book. If you decide to do an Act 2, you're going to be doing that on the fly, on your own. Which is once again why this is not like a Wizards of the Coast product. You know, they give you everything from beginning to end. Whereas if you decide to sort of explore what happens after the choice, you're going to have to do that all on your own. And I think that can be really interesting, especially if you want to, you know, write some of your own adventures. All right, so this is my sort of video on villains. Next, I'm going to talk about the NPCs, and that'll be in the next video. So hopefully you're finding this helpful and you're finding it interesting, and you tune in for the next video. Take care.